Welcome to Facts on the Ground. I'm Jesse Zerwell, and I'm here with my co-host, Misty Winston. Our guest today is independent journalist and co-host of the Pro-Democracy podcast, Alex Rubinstein. Alex, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. Misty and I have been talking for so long about me coming on the show, and it's just one reason or the other, it's fell through. So it's like, I feel like I'm finally here and it's great. So thanks again.
Yes,
this has been a process.
It has been like a year-long process.
Mm-hmm.
So in mid-July, you attended the inaugural International Religious Freedom Summit, or EARTH, as it's referred to by its acronym. So a lot to unpack here, but let's start with how you found out about the summit, what it was billed as, and how you found yourself there.
Well, I was just reading online. The thing is that I have to go to the US like every so often to because I don't have a visa here. So every so often I have to go back. And I usually take that time to visit family and stuff. But I was able to go to DC and check out the summit. I mean, I wasn't sure like, when I first found it. I'm looking at it and I'm like looking at the list of speakers, the list of like representing like of sponsors for this conference, and my mind was just totally blown. And then I'm watching the promotional videos, and you have Sam Brownback, who is the co-chair of this summit, and a former governor, former member of Congress. I think he was in the Senate too. And he's talking about monks self-immolating, and I'm looking at the sponsors, and I'm like, the Family Research Council, the Church of Scientology, Falun Gong. How is any of this real?
Mm-hmm.
Especially with as my piece talks about, and we can talk about it more later, with all these like high level Democrats involved with these people who, I think that it's just surprising to see them openly associating with them, right? Like I'm not like personally surprised, because I don't really expect any kind of moral integrity from the Democrats. But to see it so open was actually kind of shocking to me, and I didn't even totally believe it was real until I got there,
No, reading through like the list of people who participated in this, and like you said, the list of sponsors, it is like kind of the who's who of like just terrible people. Yeah. I mean, even just some of the sponsors, like the Alliance Defending Freedom, the ADF, which, I mean, this is, they target the quote unquote homosexual agenda. And then, just like you said, the Family Research Council, One Korea Network, Open Doors USA. It's like these just really terrible people. And then you have people like Nancy Pelosi, who did a video. Did she video in, or did she pre-record a video?
She videoed. I think she videoed,
okay.
And I don't know. It could have been pre-recorded. There was really no way of telling.
Right.
But it was busy in Congress that day. She may have meant to be, it may have been that she was meant to be there in person and then just couldn't make it. That was explicitly said with Josh Hawley and Tom Cotton, that, they were going to be there, but they couldn't make it. So, a lot of people did video into the plenary sessions, which are like these like large events that like the whole conference is supposed to go to, rather than like the breakout sessions, which were like panels, in smaller rooms. So a lot of people did during the plenary sessions. A lot of the high level U.S. government people did video in. Mike Pompeo was there in person,
which is creepy.
But as he put it, he's an unemployed former diplomat. So
right, yeah, he's a creepy dude. But so this is like a 3-day thing in DC, right? This took place in DC.
That's right.
So I know that it's supposed to be like this, religious freedom conference. But from your piece, it seemed that China really took like a heavy billing in the topics of conversation. So when did you first kind of get the feeling that this was going to be more of like a China bashing summit than a religious freedom summit? I mean, did you know like going in that that's what they were doing, or was it, oh, I'm here and everybody's talking about China?
Yeah, I kind of had the feeling like, because it had like just like a who's who of like imperialists, and because like organizations like Falun Gong were listed as sponsors, And then, you know, I looked at the list of the panel discussions. I looked at the topics of the plenary sessions. I had a feeling that was mostly going to be the meat of it, which is why, you know, part of the reason why I focused the panels that I went to were like only ones focused on China, you know. But you know, it was one thing that was like really fascinating to me was like figuring out like the role of the Church of Scientology in all of this, right? I wasn't really aware that like they were like on board with imperialism. You know, I don't know a whole lot about them. You know, some of the things I put in my article, I knew about. I'd heard about them before. I actually, you know, wind up buying a lot of books for my reporting, just to like be able to quote them. You know, so that was a really interesting thing to do. But you know, I learned a lot about how, you know, because they're banned in Russia and China, they've kind of like taken hawkish stances against those countries. But, you know, one of the most fascinating things for me from all this is like when I went to the booth that they had set up, which was like displayed pretty prominently, like they weren't trying to hide the fact that the Church of Scientology was a sponsor. I got a DVD that, you know, from their booth, which was branded under an organization called Youth for Human Rights. And they had other material that was branded under a different group called United for Human Rights. So they have like the Church of Scientology has two human rights front groups, which like just kind of blew my mind, right?
Yeah, I had
like,
no idea either. I had
I
no
know
idea.
And I know that like it's no surprise to me that like the human rights industrial complex is like a total sham, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was not new information for me. But to see the Church of Scientology using that to its advantage was just mind blowing. And you know, a DVD that I got from them explained how they trained the Guatemalan military, you know, 22,000 soldiers in their human rights program, which is just like, you know, and they're
which is
active.
non-existent.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course, because they're like an abusive cult, right? So
Yes. Yes. See, that's all I know about the Church of Scientology is what I learned from Leah Remini. Like I watched her show because I was I was fascinated. I'd heard you know, what they believe and how we're all like aliens or whatever.
Mhm.
And so I was like super like curious about it. So I watched Leah Remini's show and it is an abusive cult. Like there's no way around it. It is
Yeah.
100% abusive and scary. Like they're scary. They'll come for you if you fuck with them, which is, you know,
Yeah.
but yeah, the fact that they have like human rights front groups is really amusing to me because they violate the human rights of their members regularly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know, I was
and
actually, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, as you detail in your piece, Alex, Scientology has no basis in material reality. It's essentially
Yeah.
a fantasy that was made up by a science fiction writer, L. Ron Hubbard. So it makes it even more grotesquely ironic that it's part of this conference and part of the human rights industrial complex, because so many of the actors in this conference and that complex deal exclusively in material reality, political material realities, diplomatic material realities.
Yeah.
So it's beyond bizarre that the Church of Scientology would be accepted into this sphere of influence, if you will. But as you said in your piece, they used to be an enemy of the US government, and now they seem to have found common ground under the guise of religious freedom, but really advancing aims toward imperialism.
Yeah, and you know, I think the reason that they were involved, I mean, I just want to say, like, you know, this Youth for Human Rights group, they claim that they're active in 197 countries and territories. That's like almost all of them, right?
Yeah.
So they're actually pretty influential. On the DVD, there was footage of some kind of thing that they hosted in Geneva at the United Nations. You know, it's in like one of these big rooms where, you know, delegates get together and they have the United for Human Rights banner overhead. But you know, I think that the big thing is the way that conferences work really is that like you pay to play, right? You like you pay a certain amount that makes you a partner, and then you get like a certain number of things based on how much you pay. So there weren't actually any panels hosted by the Church of Scientology, so I don't think they paid enough to get that. But if they had, I think that they would have, right? but they were able to get a booth. They were listed on all the, literature and stuff. So, it's really a pay to play thing. And it just, it really just reinforces how corrupt this whole thing was, right? Like, I mean, there were, I will say, there were like some legitimate topics that were discussed. I mentioned this in my piece. Ro Khanna, to his credit, I don't know why he was there in the first place. It seems very stupid to me. But to his credit, he did talk about Saudi Arabia's persecution of Shia Muslims, right? That was really the only thing he talked about. So that wasn't terribly offensive, but it's again, like, why are you here? Right. And then, there was an Armenian archbishop who, credited Russia for, protecting Armenians in their conflict with Azerbaijan. So, I mean, there was some focus on real issues. There was like a little bit of talk about Yazidis, for example, right? A group which, like, the United States basically let, get genocided. So,
by ISIS, Islamic
it's
State,
hypocritical to like give it attention at this point, but at least it was given some attention. But like the overwhelming majority of this was about like China's crimes against religious minorities, China's genocide, so and again, this is like the first, as you noted, like Jesse, this was the inaugural event. This is going to be every year. So
That's
I
terrifying.
really hope that it is terrifying.
That
and
is
I really
terrifying.
hope that other journalists, see what I put out and decide that, okay, I'm going to do this next year, and take that up, because this is like, it's going to be big. And I think that this issue of religious freedom is going to be like one of the main weapons in the information war against China.
Yeah, I agree. And I also thought that, I mean, as much as China was a very prevalent thing, it seems like a lot of at least the organizations and people involved in this summit are very anti-gay. We mentioned Sam Brownback earlier. He was the co-chair of this summit, and he was appointed by Donald Trump. This is a guy who called gay marriage a, quote, grave threat to our central social institution, which, and it's not just him. It's, kind of across the board. There's like this anti-gay vibe, again, from all of these sponsors or, partners, whatever you want to call them.
Anti-gay, anti-trans,
Yes. Yeah. And which, again, like we mentioned Ro Khanna being there. Why are you there? Yeah. What are you doing hanging out with these people? It's a very weird thing that he would put himself in that position, but he's not the only elected official that was there. I mean, you listed a multitude of people in your piece. Yeah, there was a lot. We already mentioned Nancy Pelosi. Who were some of the other elected officials that took part in this?
Well, if you don't mind, I'll mention some unelected officials too.
Yeah,
because,
go for it.
They're important. Chris Coons, Chris Smith, Henry Cuellar. There was a big list. A lot of these people, the members of Congress, they're really not very famous, right? The more famous ones were Tom Cotton, Josh Hawley. And it was amazing to me to see Josh Hawley participating in the same summit as Nancy Pelosi, when, he's supposed to be enemy number one right now for the Democrats, because he did that, fist thing on January 6th. And then you had Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, who basically, like, his presence there meant that, like, this conference had the Biden seal of approval, right?
Right.
And there were members of Congress there that were saying, the State Department really needs to appoint an ambassador at large for religious freedom, right? And when Blinken got up, when it was his turn, he didn't go in person, but when it was his turn to speak, he promised the conference that he would be doing that in the next few weeks. And another thing he said was like, we're going to be working on this issue with many of you, right? Talking to the audience, he said, many of you we're going to be working on this issue with. And then there was, like I said, Nancy Pelosi, one really important person that your viewers may or may not be familiar with is Samantha Power. She had a few positions in the Obama administration, but really what people need to know about her is that she was the leading champion of humanitarian interventionism, a major pusher of the destruction of Libya, the NATO-backed
under the responsibility to protect doctrine.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, she's like a huge humanitarian interventionist. Of course, she has no real like humanitarian inclinations, like as a person. When she was traveling in a armed convoy, heavily armed convoy in Africa, they ran over and killed a 6-year-old boy, and like they stopped for like a minute and then left.
Mhm.
So they really don't care about people or human rights or anything like that. It's all just a show. And Samantha Power, all these people, pretty much the only one who didn't rail against China and accuse them of genocide and like crimes against humanity, all that, was Anthony Blinken. And I think he just has to be a little bit more careful with his words
Yeah.
as the Secretary of State, because that if he went there and said all these things that the other people were saying about China, that would be like a serious diplomatic scandal, but I have no doubt that he's, just as hawkish as these other people.
Yeah. So it seems like we've heard a lot of ratcheting up of the rhetoric toward China for a long time now. And it seems like whichever administration is in power, whether it's Trump, whether it's Biden, they really want to go after China in a serious way. And not just economically, but through warfare if they have to, through lawfare. Um, and it seems like all the actors who've been involved in this are realizing that despite whatever their political differences may be, they need each other to form a critical mass to try to get this accomplished. Would you agree with that? Is that what you saw when you were there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is the most bipartisan issue in Washington right now, China,
Mhm.
um, and, it's reflected in the fact that, look, I always say this. I always say we're no longer in the era of the war on terror. We're now in the era of great power competition. It's a new Cold War, and Washington, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, they're on board with it. Nancy Pelosi, a lot of the other members of Congress, or representatives from congressional bodies like the China Coalition, or the Caucus on International Religious Freedom and such. Those kinds of people, all these U.S. government people, kept saying the same thing. There's unity on this. This is one of the rare things that we all agree on. And I say in my piece, in my third piece, is when there's unity in Washington, there's going to be trouble elsewhere. And so I would absolutely agree with you, Jesse. It's really scary. I don't think that it's going to result in a hot war. First of all, I'm not so sure the United States would win that. I'm pretty sure they wouldn't. Um, and it's just not advantageous to either side, right? But I do think that these kind of conferences try to ratchet up pressure for, try to manufacture consent, I should say, for hybrid war, which is economics, it's information, it's culture, it's lawfare. And that's not good for us, right? We could have a relationship with China where it's like mutually beneficial, and we could try to lift up our people through that relationship. And that's not what Washington is interested in. They want to be top dog. This is, like I said, great power competition, global hegemony. So China's rising status is viewed as a threat. They're viewed as a strategic competitor, is the word that was used at the conference, which just tells you all you need to know. They're a strategic competitor. They're not an ally. They're not a partner for global peace or anything. They're a strategic competitor. So that's how the United States looks at the world. Any country that isn't totally subservient and willing to give up their sovereignty for access to the United States market or whatnot, is going to feel pressure. And China, which has been able to really expand its economy and really improve the standards of living in their country, is like chief of like countries which we want to overthrow, right? It was Russia for a while, but I think from here, I think the Russiagate era is also dead, right? We're
I
in
think that they
Chinagate
used
now.
Russiagate as a placeholder. I think that they weren't
Yeah.
quite ready to go after China in a full force way, and they needed a boogeyman. They needed somebody to blame for 2016, and I think Russia just, I mean, because we already have that kind of ingrained Red Scare propaganda in our brains, I think that they were just a placeholder until they were ready to go more full force at China. I think that truly that's what I think.
Yeah, and you know, you see a lot of the playbook you know, repurposed now against
Mhm.
China. There was like one Trump official that was at a conference. He was actually at the conference. He was on the panel that was hosted by Falun Gong, which I'd love to talk more about. But you know, he was saying things like, you know, China has gone after evangelicals to divide America, right? Their goal is to like divide us. And that's exactly like what like the, you know, 3-letter agencies were saying about Russia back during the 2016 election. They were saying, you know, Russia was trying to sow discord, you know, that kind of thing. So a lot of I think you're absolutely right, Misty. Russiagate was kind of like the trial run for great power competition.
Yeah, 100%. I really think that that's just where we're at. And you're right. And it's really scary the way, and when you just said, you know, we could have like a good relationship with China that's mutually beneficial for both countries. But you're thinking like a grown up, and we're not ruled by grown ups.
Yeah.
Like I say that all the time. It's really strange to me that we just accept that the only way that we can do things is just through like brute force and destruction. And we can't just, you know, have conversations and, you know, fix our problems with our words.
Diplomacy. Use
You know?
diplomacy. You know,
No, it's like people think that you're crazy. You're just a crazy hippie. You want to get along with everybody. Yeah, shouldn't that be the goal?
right.
It's weird.
So I do want to talk about Falun Gong and
Yes.
also how the Uyghurs factor into this. But
Yeah.
before we get into that, can we talk about the role of South Korea and I suppose North Korea in this? Because you go into their role in this quite a bit in your first piece, and it's interesting the rhetoric that is lobbied toward South Korea and President Moon, especially from people like Gordon Chang, who is just nonstop making up threats with regard to China. So can you talk a little bit about Korea's place in all of this?
Yeah, I'd love to. You know, I think one thing that, you know, people might not be super aware of is that like the far right community in South Korea is fucking crazy and they're powerful. They, you know, own a lot of the newspapers, and like you think Fox News is bad, like these people are psycho. You know, they're basically like the alt-right, you know, for lack of a better term. That's how they are. And they're really powerful. They're freaking out because you know, President Moon is kind of a liberal reformer. He's not like a leftist, right? But you know, the majority of Koreans support him, and he's supported a process of reconciling with North Korea, right? And that's also a very popular thing in Korea. You know, people have been separated from their families for generations. You know, it doesn't make any sense at this point, and Korea actually has no power to end the war because the war's officially not ended, right? It's just there's been a stalemate, ceasefire. And Korea doesn't have the power to actually end the war. You know, the United States is the one that has that ability in terms of like international law. So there's a lot of support for ending the hostilities. There's a lot of support for getting the U.S. military out of South Korea because, I mean, it's like, I think it's like one of the maybe the number one, you know, foreign base for U.S. troops, or host country, I should say. But the far right in North Korea, you know, they're very powerful in the media. They are able to print like a lot of lies about North Korea. You know, defectors are paid quite a bit to give testimony, and the more sexy, or for lack of a better term, their testimony, the more they get paid. And you know, it's you watch the information pipeline, and it starts out with like Chosun Ilbo, which is a far right South Korean newspaper, and then it gets into the New York Post, and then it gets into like the Daily Beast, and then it gets into the Guardian. And it's all like it's bullshit basically. So these people are really powerful. There's also what's called Korea KCPAC, which is the Korean offshoot of CPAC. So and it draws the same kind of characters. And so One Korea Network, which is one of the main sponsors of this event, has been partnered, heavily involved with KCPAC, and kind of it seems to me that it was kind of born out of that climate, right? And Gordon Chang is very much involved with both KCPAC and One Korea Network. Gordon Chang, for people who don't know, he's like a supposed China expert. He's predicted the coming collapse of China numerous times since 2000. And that was another thing that was like a recurring theme at the conference at large, was that China's gonna fall. These and I'm sitting there like, are you guys fucking crazy? Like, what world are you living in, China?
Yeah. and even if that were true, then why this conference? Why all the railing against China?
Right. Yeah, just let it. If your enemy's like dying, let them die. Don't poke them. But Gordon Chang, he's he's really a kook. For One Korea Network, in his interviews, he's been like, he's been saying that Moon Jae-in is gonna overthrow democracy in South Korea before he leaves office. These kinds of things, just like far right conspiracy theorist, really. But because he serves empire, he's considered acceptable in the mainstream.
Yeah.
And he was one of the prominent figures railing against Trump trying to negotiate with Kim Jong-un back in, was it 2018 now or 2019? It seems
I'll
so long
accept
ago.
that.
It does seem a long time ago.
It seems so long ago, but back then there was something like 80% approval by the South Korean people for that process, that reconciliation process, if you will. And I just want to point out that it's interesting the rhetoric Gordon Chang is using now about Moon possibly overthrowing the democracy of South Korea. These just childish, bombastic statements. It parallels a lot of what we heard about Trump when he was leaving office, that he's not gonna step down. He's gonna subvert American democracy. So just an interesting parallel to draw there.
No, that you're absolutely right.
That is an interesting parallel. And and actually, I think that this too also just shows a lot of the interconnectedness of all of these people. Like the One Korea Network's president is Andrew Curley, who's a former executive at BBC. And so there's all of this. I mean, it's like a revolving door. They all kind of intermingle with each other. They all work at the same networks. They're all dealing in the same propaganda. And so I think that that's, has a great deal to do with the fact that we're seeing some of the same, tactics used or the same storylines used across, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And, just if there's any investigative journalists watching this, if you can find out who funds One Korea Network, I think that would be a really big story, because
sounds like a story for Robbie Yeager.
I know, right?
I love Robbie.
he's doing amazing work. I'm really impressed.
Yeah, he's great.
But they, One Korea Network's been super successful in they're fairly new. I think just like a year or two old. Sometimes I write so much that I forget exactly what I report. So I may mix up a few things. Just what's in the article is true. What I say here, take it with more of a grain of salt.
I get that.
And it's the worst when somebody wants to interview me about like an article I wrote like a month ago, because I've written like a few things since then. It's like, oh my God, I have to read this again. But no, they've been really successful. Like right away, before they had their social media pages launched, actually, I found a YouTube video of an interview with the president, Andrew Crilley. And he was talking about how he brought all these like cameras equipment. So they were well funded prior to their launch. And, they work pretty closely with the defector community, which, as I said, there's a lot of financial incentives for them to lie about their experience in North Korea. And many of them are fugitives because, they've done illegal things like, rape or murder. But One Korea Network is not just a media company. They've been connecting defectors with Congress to give testimony. I found one of those testimonies on a congressman's webpage. I forget which congressman at this point. But yeah, again, if anyone can figure out who pays them, I think a lot of the Korean diaspora and a lot of people in South Korea would be very interested in that story.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like a Voice of America or Radio Free Europe type of operation. So perhaps there's some sort of US backing to it, but yeah, as you say, it's very opaque
Yeah.
at this point. So yeah, I'd be interested to know too, because as
Yeah.
you mentioned in your first piece, by two metrics, which are influence on American politicians and social media presence, I think was the other one. They're succeeding and they're only getting bigger and more influential. So
Yeah.
something to look out for sure.
Yeah, and actually, I didn't include any comments from experts in any of the three pieces, but I did talk to two Korea experts while I was reporting this story, because I had never heard of One Korea Network before. So when I showed this stuff to them, I'm like, both of them said to me independently, both of them said, can you please find out who funds them? So I'll leave it at that. We can move on from One Korea Network.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I'm definitely interested to see. I'm sure somebody can find out. I mean, you can always find out the information. It's just a matter of digging into it. So I would be interested to find out. But yeah, let's move on to the Falun Gong stuff because wow.
I mean, this article, it's like when I'm like, I'm looking at all those sponsors, and there's like, I think I said something like close to 40 sponsors. I'm like, I am not gonna get into all these. Like, this could be a book, and it was basically like the master document that I have that has all three articles in one was like 48 pages long. So I mean, that includes the photos too. But yeah, Falun Gong is they're basically like the Church of Scientology of China, right? And they believe a lot of the same things. Instead of using e-meters and getting your thetans measured or whatever, they believe that aliens have influenced humans to like create modern technology. I was able to, one of the he was a white American guy. He's the executive director of the Falun Dafa Association, which is another Falun Dafa is another word for Falun Gong. He was at the panel and he was saying, when you go to the Chinese English websites, the embassy websites, they say Falun Gong is evil because we're against interracial marriage. And he says, I'm in an interracial marriage. But when you look at, I also went to their to the Falun Gong website, and I found quotes from the founder saying that the way that aliens get humans to break away from the gods is by mixing the races. So it's totally contradicted. I mean, this is and Falun Gong, people may be familiar with them because NBC did an investigation a few years ago, which was actually quite good to their credit, which showed how the Epoch Times or Epic Times, I don't know how to pronounce that, but this newspaper, which is pretty ubiquitous in major cities in the United States and Canada, and I'm sure other countries too.
Yeah, when I lived in New York, I would see it for free. Yeah, for free in those bins. And I used to see a lot of commercials, when you watch YouTube and you have to suffer through the advertisements, they would have this one guy with glasses come on all the time and act like what he was talking about was, somehow connected to the apocalypse, whether, directly or ambiguously in some way. So yeah, just a little background on that publication.
Yeah, I mean, and people might know Falun Gong too from I forget how to. I don't know Again, I don't know how to pronounce it, so I apologize for that. But they have like a dance troupe that tours the U.S. So when I go and visit my family and I turn on the TV and I'm watching cable news, I see these advertisements for their dance troupe. So they're very influential. They're highly funded. And they're just like another cult, right? They're an anti-communist cult. Their newspaper claims that Donald Trump was sent from heaven to destroy the Chinese Communist Party. And you know, it's just total batshit, right? Yeah, and you know, they teach people that like their exercises, their meditation exercises cures them of illness. So you have like members that like get really sick because they need like a real doctor, and say, oh, I don't need a real doctor because Falun Gong teaches me that I can heal myself, you know? And a lot of things are banned, you know, sex, drinking, that kind of thing. So it's very much a call. And again, this is like a conference, and this is a panel at the conference hosted by them. They were a sponsor, and you know, there was a Trump official that was on this panel, sitting on this panel, and the panel was about forced organ harvesting. You know, and it was hilarious to me because Falun Gong played a video to kind of make their case for that this is a thing, that forced organ harvesting is a thing, and they said that Falun Gong organs are like preferred because they don't drink or smoke, so they have better organs. Which is like, dude, if I need an organ, like I don't care, you know, give me one, you know. You know, it's like I don't need a background check on you, you know.
No, yeah. If I need a liver, just give me a liver. I know. I mean, I prefer one if it isn't like an alcoholic's liver, but you know, there's like medical doctors who make those decisions. But yeah, these people are batshit.
Yeah,
just listening to the quotes. Go ahead, Jesse.
I just wanted to read. I did a search for Falun Gong, and the Wikipedia brief is interesting the way they present it. Falun Gong is most frequently identified with the Qigong movement in China. Qigong is a modern term that refers to a variety of practices involving slow movement, meditation, and regulated breathing. Qigong-like exercises have historically been practiced by Buddhist monks, Taoist martial artists, and Confucian scholars as a means of spiritual, moral, and physical refinement. So just the way it's whitewashed there as some sort of benign, meditative, spiritually refining practice, you know, yeah. No hint whatsoever. Maybe in the rest of the Wikipedia entry, they get to it, but no hint whatsoever of what you just outlined.
And how batshit it is. Like, it's the most boring cult ever. Like, there's a quote in here where somebody who had left the group said that they were excited, quote, that they can now listen to pop music or eat sashimi or have a beer or have sex or take up a hobby or hang out with non-believers. Like, this sounds like a really boring cult.
We need to go back to like the 70s era of cults where there's just like mass orgies. And,
right.
Like,
and lots of drugs.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this sounds really terrible. Like the worst. I bet they have the worst parties.
Yeah. Well, it's just like, it's like a heroin party because everyone's just like quietly like, you know, nodding back. Right. My joke. I apologize if that was in poor taste.
No, I think it's fine. Somebody will be pissed off about it, but who cares?
Yeah.
But it seems like it's a re-education vehicle in a sense, a not to be cliche, but a brainwashing vehicle in a sense. And I think it dovetails with what we have so often been hearing about the Uyghurs in China and the, I would say, non-genocide that's been occurring against them for a while now. We often hear it, especially in the mainstream media, there's a genocide being carried out against the Uyghur Muslim population by the Chinese government. And we also know that Uyghur Muslims have fought to the extent of at least 25,000 in Syria on the side of the jihadist proxies. So how much rhetoric was there surrounding the Uyghur issue, if you will? It seems from your reporting that there was a lot that was bandied about to further make the case against China.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the Uyghur issue has kind of overtaken all of the other issues at the conference. I don't hold me to this, but I think every U.S. government official, former or current, besides Anthony Blinken, mentioned the Uyghur issue. So you know, it used to be about Tibet, but that's kind of been pushed to the side. And you know, really, I think the reason for that is because Xinjiang is more strategically important to China in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative. So yeah, there was no shortage of emphasis on the Uyghurs at the conference. You know, every U.S. government official spoke about it. You know, I can think of 4 groups off the top of my head that have the name Uyghur in it. You have the World Uyghur Congress, the Uyghur American Association, the Campaign for Uyghurs, and the Uyghur Human Rights Project. Right, all of those groups were involved. And there may have been more, you know, for all I know. That was part of the thing, was like, I could spend a lifetime fucking investigating this conference. It was so crazy. But yeah, the Uyghur issue really took center stage. A lot of comparisons to Nazi Germany, even from Mike Pompeo himself. And you know, everyone called it a genocide. Everyone said never again. Everyone was, you know, making a case for humanitarian interventionism, right? And the Uyghur groups, you know, I think it's really important to point out that 3 of the 4 that I listed have received, excuse me, heavy financial backing from the National Endowment for Democracy, which is like, you know, a supposedly independent you know, organization, but it's not. It was sectioned out of the CIA, and you know, because the CIA became, you know, somewhat less glamorous in in the aftermath of its crimes. The U.S. government started to use the National Endowment for Democracy to fund organizations that advance their strategic goals. So, you know, you have a nice name like National Endowment for Democracy, who's gonna be like, oh, well, we don't like democracy, you know, no one. So it's able to give the U.S. government cover for that kind of meddling. And three of the groups I listed are heavily backed by the National Endowment for Democracy. The other one that's not, Campaign for Uyghurs, is founded by a former U.S. government employee, a woman who was actually at the conference. Her name is Rushan Abbas, and she worked for 7 years, or maybe 11 years, I forget. A lot of time she worked at Guantanamo Bay. And, you know, of course, we didn't hear a peep about human rights from her at that point. But now that she's no longer working there and she's leading this Uyghur organization, you know, that's the mantra, is human rights, human rights. So, you know, again, like, every level of this was just so hypocritical, astoundingly hypocritical. This is one of the craziest stories I've ever reported. I have no qualms about saying that. You know,
it is crazy. Like, just reading it, I'm like, this, how is this even real? Like, how is this a real life thing that happened? What is going on?
I mean, like, groups like Alliance for Defending Freedom, one of the main sponsors, which is calling for a return of like Christendom, you know, as I quoted them as saying in my article. It's just like, how also, like, what world do you live in? Oh, I guess it's planet Earth.
Yeah. Well, they want to bring the practice of law back to the 5th and 6th centuries. I think they explicitly say. Which in that statement, they contradict themselves by saying this has been universal orthodoxy for since then, but it's also necessary as a tool of cultural renewal. So yeah, you're going to bring about cultural renewal with something from the 5th and 6th century. That makes a lot of sense, but that just shows you, you know, the ideology and the mindset and the non-logic of the groups that are operating in this summit, and just how grotesque they are and beyond cynical, I would even say. And you know, the fact that this is being done at a 4-star hotel in DC, and it's really not, there's nothing clandestine about it at all. It seems to be all out in the open. I think that just adds another level of something frightening and disturbing to it. It's like, this is the new normal, as the saying goes.
Well, and it's crazy to me because, you know, there's no shortage of media organizations in Washington, right? But you don't hear about this kind of stuff. Like, the only popular outlets that I saw report on this conference were like Radio Free Asia, but so it's sad because everyone has a bureau in Washington. The Intercept has a bureau in Washington. It's not just CNN. Like the Intercept. Where are these people at these kind of events? Where are the people that are like going to the conferences held by the think tanks? There's no. I mean, this is a crazy story. This is like a huge scoop, right? I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but it's a huge scoop, and this kind of thing happens all the time in DC. And it'd be really nice if there was actually a media company that was willing to talk about these kinds of things. I mean, here we have, a popular enemy in liberal media. We have the Christian far right, who, didn't exactly ever show any sympathies towards Muslims, right? Especially after 9/11, all these people, like, they've never had a nice thing to say about Islam. There were so many people at this conference, or a few one guy in particular who was supposed to come but couldn't because of COVID restrictions, who are like just like Islamophobes, like blatant Islamophobes, and now all of a sudden they're all SOS Uyghurs, again, it's just totally hypocritical. And it's a tragedy that there's no willingness on the part of the media to actually investigate any of this stuff,
There's no pushback whatsoever. And you're right. All of this is incredibly hypocritical. Anytime the United States says the word like human rights, I want to vomit. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, you have no leg to stand on whatsoever. And so the fact that they're having like conferences dedicated to this whole thing and nobody is covering it, nobody's even like interested or curious about what's happening inside these rooms. That's scary. I mean, look at the people who are congregating together and brainstorming. I don't want these people working together and coming up with their evil plans.
And
I know.
And in independent media, if we see any coverage of anything related to this, it's from outlets like Democracy Now, which are constantly pushing the Uyghur genocide narrative. It's like they don't have any, they need to fill space on their show, so they just keep pushing this narrative. It's hard to tell at this point whether they actually believe in it or not, but there's no pushback whatsoever. There's no questioning of it outside of reporters like yourself and others.
You got the gray zone. You have the gray zone. You have Mint Press, and a handful of other maybe a little bit smaller websites. To borrow some terminology from the conference, God bless these outlets, because we would be in a much different place without them. Like, our thinking, our consciousness, our awareness of like how all of this operates. So much credit is owed to the gray zone.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. But what I really find the most terrifying is that they're trying to kill that level of journalism. They've been pretty successful so far. Julian Assange is still in a supermax prison. That's caused quite the chilling effect across journalism as a whole. We don't have legitimate journalism in this country on a major scale. We do have outlets like the Gray Zone that does amazing work, but I mean, we need, that's what journalism is supposed to be. It's supposed to be holding power to account. It's supposed to be adversarial, and that's just not what we have anymore. And I think that this, we're talking about this, and the fact that none of these outlets are covering events like this is just one more shot of evidence that.
Yeah. And it's, if you don't mind me getting a little personal here, this isn't just a fault of the outlets. This is about incentives for journalists, right? Because there's no incentive to cover these issues. And look, I put out this 47-page investigative report that shows how Nancy Pelosi and Anthony Blinken are working with the Church of Scientology, other cults, and the Christian far right. And you know how many reads my article has? My first one, this is the most reads. I just have to bitch for a little bit because first one has 5,338 reads, which is, pretty decent for my Substack. The second one has just shy of 2,000. The third one only has a little bit above 1,000, right? When you're verified on Twitter, which I am, you can see, you have like a separate tab in your notifications to view who other verified interactions, interactions from other verified accounts, the same kind of notifications you get otherwise on Twitter, but it's just only shows you verified people. The only people to like engage with my stuff is like the regular people that it's like you have the Gray Zone, you have Jimmy Dore, and like maybe like a DJ, you know, who's like, you know, free thinking. So like I'm putting out this crazy scoop, as I just explained, and like you don't have Intercept people, you don't have The Nation people, you don't have TYT people or any of these. Of course, you know, none of them are interested in this story. Like you know, and I'm not surprised. Like this doesn't surprise me, but this is a crazy scoop. I'm sorry, it is.
It is. It is. And it's infuriating to me that more people aren't reading it. And it's really infuriating to me that like a Ryan Grimm, where the fuck is Ryan Grimm? You're the DC bureau chief of The Intercept. Then fucking get on it, do your job. Like, and I shouldn't give him too much shit. He blocked me, talked shit about me on Twitter, and then unblocked me. I don't know. He's weird, but he does do great on Assange. So I'll give him that credit, but you're not doing your job, dude. You're not doing your job.
Yeah.
None of these outlets are, and it's very clear. Like they've just gotten worse over the past, I don't know, 4 to 8 years. Really, the Trump era destroyed. I mean, journalism just stopped essentially. Yeah, it's not good. But you're right. There are very little incentives for actual journalists to do actual journalism because it doesn't get. I mean, people were more worried about like the fight between Jimmy Dore and Cenk Uyghur, which who gives a shit, you know?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And then you know. If you want to like maintain your journalistic integrity and like report the truth on topics like Syria or China, you're gonna have professional blowback. You're gonna have a hard time because of the way that, you know, the media is set up. Mm-hmm. But you know, a retweet of my article is not gonna get them fired. So you know, come on, guys.
Right? We
got Nancy Pelosi with freaking Tony Perkins of Family Research Council. You know.
And Ro Khanna and Mike Pompeo. It's like this weird blob of, I don't even know what this is. Seriously, reading through the list of people in your first piece, I was like, what is happening?
Yeah.
It was a very confusing list of people, to say the least.
Yeah, it's dystopian. And I don't mean that in the cliche way. It actually is. And even the photos that you provide add to that sense. Like the one of Ro Khanna sitting there with empty chairs next to him, waiting for his co-panelists to come out, and he just looks like a shamed little boy sitting in a dunce chair.
Yeah.
Why am I here? Like he's asking himself that too.
I want to know why he was there. I'm going to tweet at him after we leave this interview, and I'm going to ask him why he was there because I want to know.
Well, feel free to use that picture. I was so happy they called him up first for the panel. I was like, yes. So I ran up there and I just like snapped that photo. I'm like, this is gonna blow up. Like,
what was it like to be in the room? Because I know that you told the story about how there were two guys sitting at the table and you were like trying to eavesdrop on their conversation, and then another girl. But what was it like to like mingle with some of these people who were attending this event?
You know, I tried not to mingle a lot, right? I
don't
tried to avoid mingling. You know, I wanted to be able to get all the information I needed without getting kicked out, right?
Right.
So there were like a couple panels that I went to that had Q&As. I didn't do any questions until the last panel, until I knew that this is going to be the last panel. I wanted to keep a low profile, which it's ironic because, you know, I talk about going to that sanctioned by China luncheon hosted by the Family Research Council, which like, come on, how bizarre. Like this whole thing is like, just like, what world are we in? And I'm looking at the menu and it's like Josh Hawley, Tom Cotton, roasted chicken breast with a side of asparagus and potato fingerlings, seasoned with paprika, you know? So it's really ironic that I was like, you know, trying to keep a low profile. And then this girl comes up to me while I'm sitting down and trying to listen in on these two, I assume they're NGO activists, because they were having a conversation about how one of their groups is banned in China and the other one is not. And one of them said that the anti-imperialist left thinks we're a CIA front, which was like hilarious to me. It's like, well, if the shoe fits, you know. But this girl asked if she could sit next to me, and I'm like, okay, sure, you know. And she turns out that she's a journalist for a magazine. I don't want to give her name, just because I'm not vindictive.
Right.
But she's a journalist for a magazine with that's run by Billy Graham's Evangelical Association. This is an anti-gay, actually anti-Semitic, mega church kind of guy, very wealthy. He's dead now, but his association is still very powerful. And just like, I'm not asking her questions, right? I'm not trying to dig, and she just like blurts out that they're banned in China, but they still do illegal covert missionary work there. So I'm like, and I felt so bad. I'm like, why are you telling me this? I have to report this. Like, she also told me she just bought a new house. I'm like, I don't want to ruin your life.
Right.
I may not agree with the things that you believe, but like, I'm not in this to ruin lives, but I have to report this. And I'm like, you poor girl, but it was weird being there. And of course, like I have like really long hair. And I don't have a lot of nice clothes either. So, I'm there and I'm wearing shirts like this, dress shirts, but blue jeans and boots, and everyone else. I must have stuck out like a sore thumb. I'm surprised I didn't get kicked out just for the way I dressed there. But it was, I've never seen such like in my article, I compare it to like the story of Babel, where you have like all these different groups that are like speaking the same language. I've never seen so many different ethnicities, ethno-religious groups, minorities represented in such a small space, right? You had people from all over the world that were coming to this conference, and I think a lot of other foreign government officials were there too. I wish that I had the time to get more into that, but like this thing was 47 pages long, so
yeah,
there were
we would
a
love to
lot
have
of
you back
avenues.
at another time though, and dig into some of these crazy people some more, because this is like, we could do like a whole series on this and the interconnections and all of that stuff, because whoo, it's a lot.
Yeah, well, one of the people I want to bring up, and she wasn't involved with this conference, at least directly, but that's Nikki Haley, and she has been vehemently anti-China while she was U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. And now if you go to her website, I believe it's Stand for America. It's almost like a launching pad for her possible 2024 run for president. There's a whole section devoted to basically xenophobia and just anti-China sentiment. Nothing, of course, is backed up with fact or evidence, but it reminds me of this piece Max Blumenthal wrote in late 2018 for Harper's when he was able to get into a gathering of the CNP, or Council for National Policy, where Nikki Haley was speaking. And
is this the adopt a moosh anecdote?
It might
adopt a mujahideen.
Well, that was during the that was during the 80s, with the US trying to basically bleed the Soviets dry in Afghanistan. But in this piece, he writes, less than a week before her resignation, Ambassador Haley made a pilgrimage to a decidedly immoderate, highly secretive organization of right-wing, mostly evangelical Republican operatives known as the Council for National Policy, or CNP. Her appearance before the group featured her last major speech before she announced that she would leave her official post. There was no public notice, no transcript. I was present as the only journalist inside the closed-door gathering. So I'd bring this up because it's been happening. Obviously, this is on a smaller level than what you've reported, but it's been happening for years now. This was in late 2018, and it seems like it's been building up to what you attended, what you reported on. And yeah, I just wanted to give some context to that, because this is, like you said, it's a bipartisan, like, vision quest almost, but in like the worst way.
Yeah, and like I said, these kinds of things happen all the time. It's it really frustrates me. Like I can't emphasize that enough. How little attention there is given by almost all of left media to these kinds of things, and this is where the sausage is made. This is where people network to continue their work afterwards more effectively, and this is where people need to be. If they want to understand and explain to their audiences how the regime change network operates, like, you have to be at these things, and there's just no one's going besides a handful like Max and
And yourself. Yeah.
Right.
So please, independent journalists or journalists in general, do your jobs, please.
And we see the
You
same
know?
thing happening with Iran too. Not that long ago, there was a gathering of mostly MEK members, and it was attended, and I think both spoke at it, by Mike Pompeo and Robert Menendez, the senator from New Jersey, who
Menendez is a big MEK guy. I went
yeah.
to an MEK rally. Actually, the only other journalist there was Max.
Mhm.
A couple of years ago, we both showed up there, and Medea Benjamin of Code Pink was there, and they had like the MEK. This is like another regime change cult for Iran, for anyone not familiar. But
Mujahideen e Khalq is what it stands for.
yeah, but they had pictures of Medea meeting with Iranian officials like printed out already before the event. And this is like outside the State Department, like directly outside. And they had like a horde of people that were just like chasing this little lady around with her photo and yelling, "You're a terrorist, you're a terrorist." It was the craziest shit. And like, this is another, I just launched last night a podcast called Pro Democracy Pod, and this is another great example of the pro democracy phenomenon, where I went to this MEK thing. They talked to me about wanting to do regime change and have their cult leader installed as the leader of Iran. And I reported all this, showed all the craziness, showed all the high-level U.S. government involvement, and then I did my report. I next day I'm looking at my Twitter feed and I'm seeing like all the local media, NBC News, say pro-democracy protesters gather in DC and march to the White House. I'm like, what the fuck, man? Like, you know, sorry to go on that long anecdote.
No,
but
that's
like, and again, Max and I were the only reporters there.
of course.
Yeah, and I think it relates directly to what we've been talking about with China, because obviously Iran's been in the crosshairs for a long time as well, the Western crosshairs, and Israeli crosshairs, which you could essentially say are Western crosshairs.
Yeah.
But before we let you go, one thing I do want to get into a little bit is the witness or survivor testimonies that you discuss a bit in your pieces, because as you say, that those were really the only forms of evidence that were provided at this summit, in any attempt there was to try to provide evidence against China, for the claims that were being made, that China is this repressive, evil doing superpower on the rise, and here are the testimonies to back that up. And I just want to get into that, because what I think is dangerous about that is that there's precedent for that. And I'm thinking of the first Gulf War, when we had
incubator babies.
Right. The testimony by I believe her name was Naria. I could be getting that wrong, but
that sounds right.
She turned out to be a Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter who fabricated the whole thing. And so I'm not saying that these witness testimonies are going to necessarily lead to a hot war. As you said earlier, that's probably there's probably a low possibility of that. But point being, can you get into a little bit of those testimonies, what these people were saying, and sort of how they were positioned in the summit, like what they were trying to achieve with these testimonies?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of it was trying to pull at heartstrings.
Mhm.
There was a lot of crying. But it's as Julian Assange says, like every major war from the United States has been premised on lies since World War II. And that is just as much the case with proxy war, hybrid war, that kind of thing. Whether it was, I heard survivor testimonies from Falun Gong. Of course, none of them were like saying they stole my kidney, right? But they did have like repression to talk about. At least supposedly they did. And also, I think it's worth pointing out that the organ harvesting thing has been debunked.
Mhm.
It's just not true. But and then a lot of testimony from Uyghurs and Kazakhs, people who claim that they were tortured, people who claim that like their sister was imprisoned for praying at her father's funeral, claims that just having a beard or a Quran in your house would get you sent to prison. People claiming rape, government sponsored mass rape, I think was the term that Rushan Abbas I call her Gitmo girl in my article,
Mhm.
that she used that term. Just the worst abuses that you can imagine. And there's no evidence of it. And as a Jewish person, it's like kind of offensive to me to hear people call vocational centers concentration camps, right?
Yes.
I think that like it's just sick, and look, Xinjiang, we talked earlier about Jesse talked about how a lot of people from there went and fought with the jihadists in Syria. Well, there's also been a lot of like jihadism there, right? And who are the victims of that? It's Uyghur Muslims, right? There's like disgusting video out there of mass casualty terrorist events, right? And so like this is a real problem. And it's not like I said, it's not like these people in the US government or these far right Christians are like, oh, we love Muslims. Like we just like want to make sure that Muslims are doing A-okay, right? This is like a geopolitical issue. And actually Tom Cotton, I think, really said this well. If you don't mind, I'd love to pull up this quote from him.
Sure.
Because
Yeah, go ahead.
it really just it just lays out the whole game. So let me just pull this up real quick.
While you do that, I just want to correct myself.
Sure.
The young woman's name was Naira, not Naria.
Naira.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I knew that sounded
Yeah.
close.
Yeah.
That's
So
funny.
here's what I wrote. I wrote, Cotton may have given away the game, however, when he noted that Uyghurs are, quote, a relatively small minority in northwestern China, but Xi Jinping and Beijing leaders view that as central territory for their Belt and Road initiatives, so they can run rail and highways and pipeline in the western provinces of China and not have to worry about the U.S. Navy to the east of China. I mean, this is from Tom Cotton himself.
Mhm.
So I didn't try to do debunking in my article, right? That's been done. The gray zone's done that.
Mhm.
So I tried to expose the network and how the aggressors operate, right? And I think that it was hard to put all this information together, but they also like laid it out really clearly for me. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, no, it is an exorbitant amount of information. You did a really good job of making the connections and, kind of showing how these organizations work with each other for their evil deeds, which is, I mean, it really is. It sounds very conspiratorial and it sounds very like, they're all, because people tell me all the time, what do you think that they like get in a boardroom and like,
Yes.
come up with all the, yes, they do. That's
Yes,
exactly what they do. Yes, that's exactly what they do.
Yeah.
So people think
And
that's conspiratorial, but that's just how it works.
Yeah. And as I said earlier, now they're doing it out in the open. And
Mhm.
some of them, like Josh Hawley, are being paid for it, as you've
Mhm.
reported,
Yeah.
to just appear and speak for an hour and he was paid something like $2,500.
Just to be clear, though, that wasn't
That
for
was
this
for a
conference.
Blackstone thing. Yeah, that was for
okay. That was
Blackstone, which is a part of the Alliance Defending
So
Freedom.
he was paid by a sponsor who was also at this event too, but it was for a different event.
It was for a different event.
Yeah. But it's still, he's still being paid by the same, crazy people.
Like I said, there's a network,
Mhm.
right? And I tried to show that network, and apparently the Church of Scientology is a part of this.
Who knew? That blew my mind. When I read Church of Scientology, I'm like, say what? What is happening? Because I honestly, like you said, you don't know much about it. All I know is what I know from Going Clear, whatever that show is called that Leah Remini did. So I know about like the stuff that they do to family members and like all of the crazy stalking and harassment and all of that. But I had no idea that they were like really big into imperialism and were like buddying up with government officials and all of that stuff. So that's kind of terrifying. But the pieces are really excellent. Everybody should check them out. Alex has a Substack. It's Real Alex Ruby, I think, right? RUBI.
We'll link to
that. We'll link to all the pieces. Yeah. I tweeted out one. Yeah, of course. And then do you want to talk a little bit about the podcast, just what it is, what you got? You just launched it yesterday. So
I really appreciate that. So it's exclusive on Rockfin. It might seem a little pricey for one podcast, which is just once weekly, but you actually get access to a lot of other great content on Rockfin. So I hope that, and if you're already on Rockfin, please give us a follow. We launched last night. We're called Pro Democracy Pod. And, as I kind of explained earlier, this is kind of a joke, about the kind of movements that are supported by the United States with training, weapons. It's like the same thing as like moderate rebels, right? It's like, it's like the worst characters. And like, of course, most people probably know the term pro-democracy protester from Hong Kong. At this conference, there was a guy who was associated with a guy who was another guy, a member of his group, who was harboring explosives. And this guy is now a fugitive in DC and was at the conference. So actually last night, we're going to give a democracy award every week. And I nominated this guy at the conference, this Hong Kong separatist. He has no qualms about identifying himself as a separatist. I nominated him for our weekly democracy award. But we're gonna try to like expose the U.S. role in various democracy movements. And which isn't to say that all popular uprisings are suspect, but when they start beating up old people and burning down trade unions and getting money from the United States, we're gonna take a look at that. And this is something we've seen: Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bolivia, Hong Kong, Belarus, Russia. We see the pro-democracy protesters all the time in Russia.
Ukraine.
Ukraine. It doesn't matter if they're fucking Nazis, right? If they're pro-democracy protesters, according to the media and the U.S. government. So this is something that we really wanted to highlight. We're going to talk about other things too. It's not going to be all about that, but we're really excited to be working with Rockfin and excited to be starting this show. So
I'm really excited to check it out. I didn't get a chance to check it out last night, but I'm really excited to check it out. I'm always looking for new podcasts and new information and all that stuff. So I'm really pumped about it. Rockfin's amazing. If you guys aren't on Rockfin, you should be on Rockfin. We need to move away from YouTube. The censorship is out of control.
Who's your co-host?
Her name's Mila Garayeb. She's a Canadian law student, but a very smart writer.
Excellent. I really look forward to checking it out. So everybody check out the Substack, check out the podcast over on Rockfin, sign up, endorse the podcast if you're able to. You get all access to everybody's premium content if you sign up for $9.99 a month. So if you can do that and support a content creator, that's an excellent thing for you to do. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm sorry that it took us this long to do it, but here we are.
I'm
finally
just happy to finally be here,
right?
And it's been so fun talking to you guys. So thank you so much.
Anytime you want to come back, you're always welcome. If you have a new piece out or whatever, and you want to get it out there, we're always happy to have you back. So thanks for coming on. We appreciate it. Thanks everybody for watching, and we will catch you next time.